August 16, 1944, Piedmont Army Research Center, Germany. Physicist Dr. Wernher von Braun stood on a cracked concrete observation platform. His leather boots scraped against the surface as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. His gaze fixed on a 14-meter-long cylindrical object, the V-2 rocket, sitting on a rusted steel launch rail 500 meters away. The rocket's derailleur fuselage glinted in the afternoon sun. Its liquid oxygen tanks frosted white. A technician in a gray jumpsuit gave a thumbs-up from the launch control bunker. Von Braun nodded, his jaw tight. The intercom crackled to life. Launch sequence initiating in 60 seconds. Valves deep within the rocket's engine bay hissed open. Ethanol 92% pure, mixed with 8% water for stability, and liquid oxygen began flowing into the combustion chamber. At T-minus 10 seconds, the engine ignited. A burst of orange flame, 2 meters long, erupted from the exhaust, kicking up clouds of dust that coated the launch rail. The rocket lifted off slowly, its tail sinking into the dust cloud, then accelerated sharply as thrust built to 25 tons. It climbed vertically, piercing the stratosphere, before arcing into a ballistic trajectory toward a target 320 kilometers away, a derelict ship in the Baltic Sea. Von Braun checked his stopwatch. The flight should take 5 minutes, 23 seconds. But at 3 minutes, 17 seconds, the intercom squawked. Guidance Euro drift detected. Course deviation 15 degrees. He watched as the rocket's contrail curved away from the target. Seconds later, a distant splash marked its crash into the sea. This was the V-2, Nazi Germany's retaliation weapon too, a machine built to win a war would never turn, but one that would rewrite the rules of science and exploration. The V-2's origins did not begin with the Nazis. They began in the 1920s, when a small circle of German engineers and dreamers, including Hermann Oberth, a Romanian-born physicist, published papers on spaceflight. Oberth's 1923 book The Rocket into Planetary Space argued that liquid-fueled rockets could reach orbit. His ideas inspired a young Wernher von Braun, who wrote to Oberth at 16, asking for advice. By 1930, von Braun was a physics student at the University of Berlin, building small rockets in his garage. His work caught the eye of Captain Walter Dornberger, a German army engineer who saw rockets as a way to bypass the Treaty of Versailles, which banned Germany from developing long-range artillery. In 1932, Dornberger recruited von Braun to lead a secret army rocket program with a budget of 50,000 Reichsmarks, about $12,000 at the time. Their first lab was a converted artillery shed in Kummersdorf, a village 30 kilometers south of Berlin. The team, 6 engineers, 2 technicians, and a secretary, worked with rockets no longer than 2 meters, powered by gasoline and liquid oxygen. Early tests were disasters. On April 10, 1933, their first rocket exploded 2 seconds after launch, sending shrapnel into the shed's roof. On June 22nd, a rocket's fuel line leaked, covering the launch pad in gasoline. A spark from a tool ignited it, burning 3 technicians. But each failure taught them critical lessons. Gasoline was too volatile. They switched to ethanol. Liquid oxygen needed better insulation. They added foam jackets to the tanks. Valves needed tighter tolerances. They began machining parts in-house. By 1936, they had built a rocket that could fly 2.5 kilometers, reaching an altitude of 1 kilometer. It was a small step, but enough to convince the Army to fund something bigger. In 1937, the Army moved the program to Piedmont, a remote peninsula on the Baltic Sea. The site was chosen for its isolation, far from prying eyes, and its access to water for testing. Over 18 months, 4,000 workers built a complex of launch pads, test stands, machine shops, and barracks. There was even a small airfield for transporting parts. The goal was clear: build a rocket that could carry a 1-ton high-explosive warhead 300 kilometers with an accuracy of 5 kilometers. The project was codenamed A for Arbeitsgruppe 4, Working Group 4. It would later be renamed V2 to boost Nazi propaganda. The first A4 prototype was completed in January 1942. It was a marvel of mid-20th century engineering. The fuselage was made of duralumin, an aluminum-copper alloy that was 30% lighter than steel, but twice as strong. It was divided into 3 sections: the nose cone, holding the warhead, the midsection, holding the fuel tanks, and the tail, holding the engine and guidance system. The engine, designed by BMW, was a liquid-fueled marvel. It mixed ethanol and liquid oxygen in a combustion chamber lined with copper to withstand 2,700 degrees Celsius temperatures, and used 18 cooling channels to prevent melting. The guidance system, built by Siemens, relied on 2 gyroscopes, one for pitch, one for yaw, and a pendulum device that measured the rocket's angle relative to the ground. To control direction, small rudders on the tail adjusted based on signals from the gyroscopes. The first test flight was scheduled for June 13, 1942. The rocket was fueled at dawn, liquid oxygen hissing as it filled the tanks. At launch, it lifted off but veered left immediately. It crashed 1.5 kilometers from the pad, exploding in a fireball that burned for hours. The team spent 3 months debugging the guidance system. They discovered the gyroscopes had been calibrated incorrectly, and tried again on October 3, 1942. This time, the A4 flew perfectly. It climbed to 88 kilometers, the edge of space, traveled 190 kilometers, and landed within 4 kilometers of its target. Dornberger sent a telegram to Berlin: "The rocket has reached space. The war will be won with this weapon." Hitler, who had previously dismissed the project as a toy for engineers, ordered 10,000 V2s built. Production would begin immediately at the Mittelwerk factory, a network of tunnels near Nordhausen, Germany. Building the V2 was a logistical nightmare. The fuselage required 400 duralumin panels, each curved to precise specifications. Workers at the Mittelwerk cut the panels using hydraulic presses, then riveted them together with 12,000 aluminum rivets. Each rivet had to be sealed with rubber gaskets to prevent fuel leaks. Even a 1 mm gap could cause an explosion. The engine was even more complex. Its 1,700 parts included valves, pumps, and a turbine that powered the fuel system. Each part was machined to tolerances of 0.01 millimeters, finer than a human hair, using specialized tools imported from Switzerland. The guidance system's gyroscopes were so delicate that they had to be assembled in a dust-free room, with workers wearing cotton gloves to avoid oil from their skin damaging the components. If you found this interesting, get a thumbs up to show your support. Drop a wonderful in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Stick around till the end, because I reveal 3 mind-blowing facts you won't want to miss. Haven't followed yet? Hit that follow button so you won't miss our next deep dive. Trust me, the best is yet to come. Precision came at a steep cost. Each V2 took 5,000 hours to build, more than twice the time needed to build a Panzer IV tank. The duralumin had to be imported from Norway, as Germany lacked bauxite mines, the raw material for aluminum. The liquid oxygen, which boiled at minus 183 degrees Celsius, was produced at 3 specialized plants, each consuming 10,000 kilowatts of electricity, enough to power a small city. By 1943, the V2 program was eating up 15% of Germany's aluminum production and 4% of its electrical output. It was a drain on resources that could have been used for tanks, planes, or artillery. Worse, the metalwork factory relied on slave labor. In 1943, the Nazis began deporting prisoners from concentration camps, mostly Jews, Poles, and Soviets, to work there. They were housed in barracks surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, fed 1,000 calories a day, half the recommended intake for an adult, and forced to work 12-hour shifts without protective gear. Many handled toxic chemicals or heavy machinery with no training. Accidents were common. A prisoner who dropped a part might be beaten to death. One who slowed down might be shot. An estimated 20,000 prisoners died at Mittelwerk from starvation, disease, or violence. Von Braun and Dornberger visited the factory multiple times. They saw the barracks, the emaciated prisoners, the guards with whips. They did nothing. The V2, meant to symbolize German superiority, was built on suffering. Testing the V2 continued through 1943, with most flights ending in failure. On March 16, 1943, a rocket's engine exploded 10 seconds after launch, sending shrapnel into the observation bunker and killing 3 technicians. On June 20th, AV-2's fuel pump failed mid-flight. It crashed into the village of Zempen, killing 6 civilians and destroying 12 houses. The guidance system remained the biggest flaw. The gyroscopes drifted over time. After 3 minutes of flight, they could be off by 5 degrees, enough to miss the target by 25 kilometers. The team added a radio control system. Ground stations near the launch site sent signals to adjust the rocket's rudders, but Allied planes began jamming the signals with radio noise. By September 1943, only 1 in 5 test flights reached their targets. The Allies had known about the V2 since 1942, thanks to spy planes and double agents. On August 17, 1943, 596 British Lancaster bombers attacked Piedmont. They dropped 1,800 tons of bombs, destroying 70% of the facility, including the main machine shop and 2 launch pads. 72 workers were killed, and production was delayed by 6 months. The Nazis responded by moving most of the V2 program underground. They expanded the Mittelwerk tunnels, digging new chambers for assembly lines and storage. By early 1944, the factory was producing 50 V2s a month. The first operational V2 launch came on September 8, 1944. The rocket was fired from a mobile launch pad near The Hague, Netherlands, chosen because it was within range of London. At 6:43 p.m., it lifted off, climbing into the clouds. 28 minutes later, it crashed into a residential street in Chiswick, West London. The explosion destroyed 10 houses, killed 3 people, and injured 22 more. Over the next 6 months, 1,115 V2s would hit London, Antwerp, Belgium, and Liège, Belgium. They killed 9,000 civilians and wounded 27,000 more. But the V2 was a military disaster. It could not hit specific targets, factories, airfields, or ports, only large cities. It did not disrupt Allied supply lines or break civilian morale. By January 1945, the Allies were advancing into Germany and V2 launches slowed as fuel and parts ran out. The last V2 to hit London fell on March 27, 1945. killing one person. The V-2's failure was rooted in its design. Its fuel system was temperamental. Liquid oxygen evaporated so quickly that the rocket had to be fueled 30 minutes before launch, leaving it vulnerable to air attack. Its warhead, 1 ton of high explosive, was less powerful than the 8 tons of bombs a single British Lancaster could carry. Its accuracy was so poor that hitting a city was a matter of luck, and its cost was prohibitive. Each V-2 cost 100,000 Reichsmarks, enough to build 10 Panzer IV tanks or 20 Bf-109 fighters. Hitler's wonder weapon was a waste of resources, a last-ditch gamble that paid off for no one, except the scientists who would later use its technology to reach the stars. As American troops advanced into Germany in April 1945, von Braun and 120 of his top engineers fled Piedmont. They loaded their research papers into a truck, drove to Bavaria, and hid in a cave near the town of Oberjoch. They feared capture by the Soviets, who would likely send them to Siberia, or execution by the Nazis, who wanted to destroy all V-2 data to prevent it from falling into Allied hands. On May 2, 1945, they surrendered to American troops. The U.S. government saw immediate value in their expertise. Operation Paperclip, a top-secret program, was launched to bring German scientists to America. Von Braun and 1,600 others were given new identities, jobs at Army research labs, and immunity from prosecution for their roles in the Nazi regime. Their past, including knowledge of slave labor at Middlework, was buried. Von Braun's team was sent to White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, a remote desert site where the U.S. tested new weapons. They were tasked with studying captured V-2s and modifying them for scientific research. The first American test flight of AV-2 came on April 16, 1946. The rocket climbed to 65 kilometers, carrying instruments to measure temperature and pressure in the upper atmosphere. On October 24, 1946, a modified V-2 reached 105 kilometers well into space, carrying a 35mm camera. The camera took 350 photos, including the first clear images of Earth's curvature. These photos were published in newspapers and magazines around the world, inspiring public interest in space exploration. For the first time, people could see their planet as an isolated sphere in the blackness of space. The V-2's technology began to spread. Its engine design, with a liquid fuel combustion chamber and cooling channels, became the blueprint for modern rockets. In 1947, the U.S. Army began developing the Redstone rocket based on the V-2's engine but with improved guidance. The Redstone would become America's first operational ballistic missile, capable of carrying a nuclear warhead 320 kilometers. It would also launch the first American astronaut, Alan Shepard, into suborbital space in 1961. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, had captured Piedmont's remaining equipment and recruited 2,000 German engineers. They used V-2 technology to build the R-1 rocket, their first ballistic missile, which flew in 1948, and later the R-7. The R-7, a multi-stage rocket based on V-2 principles, launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, into orbit in 1957. The space race between the U.S. and USSR was, at its core, a race built on the V-2's design. The V-2's scientific impact extended far beyond rocketry. Its flights provided the first detailed data on the upper atmosphere. Scientists learned that the stratosphere, 10 to 50 kilometers, has a constant temperature of minus 56 degrees Celsius, while the mesosphere, 50 to 85 kilometers, cools to minus 85 degrees Celsius. They discovered cosmic radiation, high-energy particles from distant stars that pose a risk to astronauts. The V2's guidance system led to advances in inertial navigation. Modern planes, ships, and even smartphones use gyroscopes and accelerometers based on the V2's design. Its liquid-fuel technology paved the way for the Saturn V rocket, which carried Apollo 11 to the moon in 1969. But the V2's moral legacy is irredeemable. It was a weapon of terror, built by slave labor, used to kill innocent civilians. Von Braun and his team never fully acknowledged their guilt. In interviews after the war, von Braun claimed he was only interested in spaceflight, that he had no choice but to work for the Nazis. But documents declassified in the 1990s showed he had signed letters requesting more slave labor for middle work. He had visited the factory and seen the conditions. He had even attended a meeting where the execution of lazy prisoners was discussed. The V2 remains a stark reminder of how scientific progress can be co-opted by tyranny, and how even the most groundbreaking technology can be stained by blood. Today, fragments of V2 rockets are scattered in museums around the world. The Science Museum in London has a full-scale V2, its duralumin fuselage scarred by shrapnel from a test flight. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. displays a V2 engine, its copper combustion chamber still shiny from decades of preservation. The Deutsches Technikmuseum in Berlin has a mobile launch pad used to fire V2s from the Netherlands. Plaques next to these exhibits tell two stories. One a Nazi weapon that failed, one a device that changed the course of science. In Piedmont, a memorial stands on the site of the old launch pads. It is a simple stone wall etched with the names of 20,000 slave laborers who died building the V2. Nearby, the Piedmont Historical Technical Museum tells the full history of the rocket program, from Oberth's early papers to the space age. Visitors can walk through a replica of the middlework tunnels without recreating the suffering, touch pieces of original V2s, and read letters from scientists who worked there. The museum's mission is clear. Remember the victims, honor the science, and never let one be used to justify the other. The V2 story is one of contradiction. It was a weapon built to destroy, but it became a tool to explore. It was born from tyranny, but it helped free humanity's curiosity about the stars. It failed at its intended purpose, winning a war, but succeeded in something far greater. It showed that humans could reach beyond Earth. When the Apollo 11 crew landed on the moon in 1969, they stood on a surface that had been touched by technology rooted in the V2. When satellites orbit Earth today, sending data about climate change or communication signals, they rely on principles tested by the V2. Wernher von Braun died in 1977, never fully reckoning with his past. But his work, for better and for worse, shaped the modern world. The V2 remains a symbol of both humanity's worst and best instincts, our capacity for cruelty and our capacity to transcend it through discovery. It was a failed wonder weapon, but it was also the first step on a journey that continues today, one where we reach for the stars not to wage war, but to understand our place in the universe. As the sun sets over Piedmont's empty launch pads, the wind carries a faint echo of rocket engines. It is a reminder that even the darkest chapters of history can hold seeds of progress, if we have the courage to learn from them, rather than repeat them. The V2 failed at war, but it succeeded at something more enduring. It changed how we see the world and the cosmos beyond.